Republican movement. At the onset of 1969 and 70, that crisis, Jim trod the streets of Belfast, marshalling not only this organisation, but as chairman of the Citizens Defence Committee, he played a leading role in minimising the effects of the violent pogroms which swept Belfast at that time. And again, in 1970, Jim Sullivan must be found at the head of his people, resisting the now historically stupid British Army curfew of the Lower Falls. And after interment again in 1971 and 72, Jim led the Republican clubs into the council chambers of Northern Ireland as the first Republican clubs councillor elected in 1973. And so in the 1980s, in spite of serious ill health, Jim has continued to turn up, to chide, rebuke and encourage in his own blunt way whenever and wherever he can. Who can forget his highly influential contribution to the name change debate at this Sardesh in 1982? And let there be no misunderstanding of the man. And so, to our second. She was deeply involved in the Labour movement in Britain and was closely associated with many progressive campaigns. And she returned to Ireland in the early 1980s and opened the guest house, which was become renowned for the unique McGee brand of hospitality, which became a home away from home for many socialists and progressives visiting this country. And so, to the last of our comrades, we are speaking to all those members who have given so much to our party and to our purposes. Seamus Rogers. Thank you very much, comrades. I now hand you back to the chairman.
Cordy Fanak, the Classic Catala Raga, my douchebara. Kahirlak, Comrade, Carja, so Sheeligus Public Tig, Hyakti o Gokard and Tier, agus a Hyakti o Party Ella, a honey going again. Berim Falcher Roy Villa, Marisol Liv, Sean Torad Dernak, a basic 30 Maruk Duran and 40. Buicas le dia a dershiv. Well, buicas le dia derlam hain peshgele. Sonorad Shagak Blin, Riname Eric Diark and 40, Kamalama Swinty hain, and a Keshtan Amura Sawalia, agus again, the Keshtan of Via Karas doing a Rina Blina. Each should a Koros for Gore, agus Troregan, don Blin le Chacht, a Laganamak freshen. Well, ní mar sin a bheadh sé nacht. Beidh cuid sin san órad carcalór, ach beidir go mbeidh mo smaointe gol ar nói, tá sé deacair sin a héine, leis an léirscris ar siúil sa túisceart agus an diostíocht an bochtanas agus an imirce ag bhile an tír illig. Ach ní crí hen sé sin ach nach bhfuil an sóisialachas a gcuin go fóil sa tír seo, ná sa bhreath. Gan ahrathe mion, gan ahrathe dearca, agus gan nua tuiscint, tá tú can bheithe. Tá tú ionanas a bheith marmh. Agus ins na seascadaí, dathraíomar cuile rud ach na bun principle. All changed utterly, and a new party was born. In light of my life and work, and which is the vision and goal and guiding light of oppressed peoples throughout the world. And that will lead me to speak of oppression, that tight lid which has got to be lifted off to allow people out into the light of freedom. And in turn, that leads me to speak of the struggle to lift the lid of oppression, a struggle which I believe can only be begun, organised and carried out by people who accept the necessity for change. Once you accept the necessity to change, you're already mentally free and on the high road to true freedom. So I will be talking to you tonight about oppression, change, freedom. And freedom is the acceptance of the necessity to change. Now, I have lived by this principle, and the party has lived by this principle, and it has never let us down. It is a principle as true in personal life as it is in political life. That principle is a fundamental law of the universe and of life itself. Life means change. And although it has not been spelt out in a single sentence, it is the single most important theme that runs through all the works of Karl Marx. It is a principle that was tested in the workshop of history by all the great parties of the working class. It was the foundation stone of the Bolshevik Revolution, which again and again accepted the necessity to change, even if it meant a bitter peace with Germany, or an unpalatable, if limited, form of capitalism, as in Lenin's new economic program. And what other principle but that principle is driving and guiding the second great renewal of socialism, which is now going on in the Soviet Union? Freedom is the acceptance of the necessity to change. Now, the world won't change just because you want it to change, and it won't change just because you need it to change. The world only changes when people understand that nothing holds them back except their old ideas, their failure to accept the necessity for change. And they finally agree to strike for freedom when they do accept the necessity to change. A party of the working class is the political instrument of those who both need and want to change the world. And that is a job description of the Workers' Party. And like all job descriptions, it is continually challenged by capitalism. So every day it has to be written out again, negotiated again, fought for again, consolidated again, and every day the party must prove itself all over again, because every day is a different day. And every day the world is changing, and every day it needs to be looked at carefully, studied, because it is not the world as it was yesterday. For 26 years, this party has been in a state of continual change and in a state of continual calm about that change. And this willingness to change the sacred principles as laid down by our forefathers, funny thing that we've never seemed to have had any foremothers, I suppose. It's a strange biological fact which probably accounts for a lot of the schizophrenia in our society. But this willingness to change the sacred principles seems to drive Mr. Maurice Manning and his friends in the media to a frenzy of fury. Apparently, Mr. Maurice Manning thinks the media should dig up some dispute in the Workers' Party because he finds us suspiciously calm in our approach to the contest for president, and whose candidates he finds far too united on ideological matters, as compared with, say, Fine Gael. Which Morris implies is a powerhouse of profound philosophical speculation. Now, don't be nasty and say you thought their only interest was furtive financial speculation. However, 50 years ago, Mr. Manning's party were stamping around in blue shirts and beating up Republicans. Today, they are stamping around in sweatshirts and beating us up in the media because we're not the real Republicans like we used to be. For over 20 years, this party has been accepting the necessity to change, and all of it was done in public at Ardèche after Ardèche. Some people, like Maurice Manning, never noticed. Now suddenly they look at us, they see we look different, and they say we must have done it all in secret because otherwise we should be in a state of shock after killing all those sacred cows which they were used to seeing around the place. The fact that we killed sacred cows at every Ardèche in public over the past 20 years, and that the whole process began with a massively publicised walkout by the Provost, has caused some journalists to think that Mr. Manning must have been asleep for the last 20 years, and now he's going around like Rip Van Winkle, unable to understand why everything is not the way it was before. Which, I suppose, is a fair enough description of the politics of any member of Fine Gael. The most sacred principle for a socialist party is the principle of change itself. And any principle apart from that is only sacred until such time as it is won and then it is replaced by another principle. Let me give you an example of what I mean. The emancipation of women is one of the general aims of this party. But every year women are revising the concrete forms that this general aim should take. 70 years ago, the emancipation of women was largely confined to securing the vote. 25 years ago, the emancipation of women was largely confined to securing equal pay for equal work, not yet really achieved. Today, the emancipation of women is widened to securing freedom from sectarian and sexually oppressive legislation. Tomorrow, when that battle is won, the agenda will again be deliberately confined for tactical reasons to allow the concentration of all our forces on the next step. Who knows what the next step may be? Whatever it may be, it will arise from a desire for some freedom that involves the necessity to change, and the necessity to change society to win that freedom. So there are no sacred principles. Women are not the objects of history. They are the subjects of history. They will write the agenda for the next phase of the struggle. And for the duration of that struggle, that agenda is a sacred principle for so long as the struggle lasts, and no longer, because there are other principles and other struggles looking for a place on the agenda. There are no fixed principles about what is on the agenda because the agenda is always changing. There can only be fixed principles about the need for an agenda. The objectives of this party keep moving, so the party must move in pursuit. Change is the permanent condition of a party of the working class. Changing the world means precisely that. And since the party is part of the world which it is changing, it must change too. A party of the working class which claims to be trying to change the world and is not itself changing with it is not only a contradiction in terms, but is a sick party. If it is not changing, it means it has stopped listening to the working class, which is forced to continually change by changes in the process of production. And it looks to the party of the working class, it looks to us to replace the erratic and inhuman changes of capitalism with a planned process of production in which change is no longer arbitrary, but anticipated and accepted and humanized, so that humanity is the author of change and not its victim. And that is why I say that freedom is the acceptance of the necessity to change. The Workers' Party is a political party of the working class, and since the party is drawn from the working class, it must change with the class it represents. Any party which says it will never change is not a party of revolution, but a party of reaction. The Provisionals are a classic case in point. They have no language except the language of conservatism. Nothing will change. There will be no ceasefire. There will be no truce. There will be no settlement except our settlement. They cannot win the war, and they cannot lose the war. So the war must go on until the British leave Ireland, at which magic moment they pretend that for some reason the million Protestants, whose sons and daughters they have butchered for almost 20 years, will suddenly fall into the arms of Éire Nua or whatever crackpot version of nostalgia they are peddling at that particular time. The Provost never listened to people. If they listened, they would hear the people telling them they want peace. But the Provosts don't want to hear about peace, any more than Hitler wanted to hear about peace. They cannot cope with peace. They have no ideas about peace. In fact, they are terrified of peace. After 20 wasted years and over 2,000 wasted lives, the Provost still won't listen to the people on whose behalf they claim to be waging a war for Irish unity. And the people keep telling them that each day of their murderous sectarian war, Irish unity moves further and further away. For nearly 20 years, they have been killing Irish Protestants to force the British out. But 1 million Protestants in Northern Ireland claim to be British. Irish, but British. And when they live and act as British, they are accused of collaboration and become, in that chilling phrase of the Provost, legitimate targets. For the first time since Wolfe Tone and the United Irishmen set out the Republican goal of uniting Catholic, Protestant and dissenter, the Protestant people in this generation have for the first time been openly named and targeted as enemies of the people. What the Provosts mean by Brits out is simply prods out, and they proved this weekly in the killing fields of Fermanagh. So after 20 years, do we see the Provosts poised for power north and south? In the north, the much vaunted political strategy has led to the spectacular coup of Adams being able to talk to John Hume. And in the south, after almost 20 years of exclusive interviews in the most exclusive magazines and Sunday newspapers, the only place they can win a seat is in the back row of questions and answers. The Workers' Party has long since learned that if you want freedom, you must accept the necessity for change. Always throughout the long years of struggle, we kept our eyes on the prize, freedom. Of course, the prize is still before us to be won, but we have forged the weapon to seize that prize. And that weapon is you and I and all of us together in the Workers' Party. As we strengthen and advance and become the ideological battering ram of our class, no Bastille in this country will be safe. And there is no shortage of Bastilles. Bastilles which imprison our class in this society, crippling lives with material poverty and poverty of the mind, where generation after generation are told by the class of power and privilege, thus far and no further. That is your lot, accept it. Where lives become mere existences, and those mere existences become a scramble to survive. Where joy and learning and expression and hope and cultural self-fulfillment and happiness itself are the private property of those who own the wealth and who think they own our lives. The prize is freedom, oppression is the enemy, and our weapon is the people through this party. Many people's concept of oppression is very limited. It is not just the dawn knock of the political police. It is not just the tramp of jackboots or the crack of skulls under battens. It can be subtle, quiet, invisible, so that you can be absolutely persuaded that the oppression itself is part of your freedom, until you recognize that capitalism is oppression, that the system is the jail. Is it not oppression to see the wealth created by workers poured into the pockets of profiteers and speculators? Is it not oppression to have your company or factory closed down so that while you and your family are left in poverty and misery, your bosses gain increased wealth by selling off the assets of your company? Is the suffering and waiting and wasting and dying of those languishing in need of public medical care, is that torture and death not oppression? Is the system which slams the door to higher learning, in the faces of the children of workers, while the children of the owners of wealth and property pack our universities? Is that not vengeful and oppressive? Is it not oppression of both teachers and children to force out or discard hundreds of teachers of our children, so that while the brightest and best might get by, thousands of children will be mentally maimed and damaged for life? The thousands of parents who fill the streets on this issue in a surprising display of militancy and anger they see in education a means of escape for their children from the cycle of disadvantage, from the oppression which they themselves experienced. And they know that education can lead them to freedom from oppression. But they don't yet clearly understand that the system of oppression, the capitalist system, is designed to ensure that they don't get that education, that they don't ever be allowed to break free. That is what capitalism, that is what oppression is about. This is a shameful system of economic oppression which finally ships tens of thousands of our young people out of the country like excess garbage. And this, they are told, is the proof of their freedom. They have freedom of movement. They are free to go wherever they like, but not free to live and work at home. There are, of course, other oppressions: social oppression and oppression of the rights of individuals, seen in recent legislation and constitutional amendments. There is the oppression of women, who are denied the right to play a full and equal part in the sharpening clash of social forces. There is also denial of human rights and oppressive legislation, north and south. And it is right that I should recall this, if only very briefly, in this 20th anniversary of the Civil Rights Campaign, launched in 1968, and we have here, as our chairman here, a former chairman of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, Paddy Joe McLean. There is a temptation today to glance back over the shoulder with almost an apology, which we may now regard with some pardonable nostalgia and take no further account of. Not so. 1968 was a year of considered realism and clarity, following several years of diligent work clearing the ground for what should have been a genuine turning point in Ireland's modern history. And this party, and the spirit which guided this party, was the moving spirit behind the civil rights movement. Its purpose was to remove the oppression of discrimination and bigotry. But just as this oppressive lid about oppression became themselves the cornerstone of the Bastille of oppression itself. So we have a task to complete 20 years later, when we lift the sectarian terror off our backs. We want to see workers' rights protected in a Bill of Rights, and we declare that the only fair employment is full employment. We want social. Some of our comrades died, all for that vision of true freedom. Next year, 1989, will be the 200th anniversary of the most profound social explosion in human history, providing significant